in the Lenape culture, people did not share their real names. They didn't want to share their real names because they felt like it would give spiritual power to their enemies. In addition, a lot of Native Americans were often given new names or nicknames at different periods of their lives, particularly to mark life passages such as reaching manhood. And it was the same with Captain Pipe. So Captain Pipe, probably born in 1725, maybe 1740 AD. Captain Pipe was a Lenape chief. His maiden name and childhood name, perhaps his actual name, was Coneyeshquano-Hill. So Coneyeshquano-Hill, which means maker of daylight, would have been Captain Pipe's original name. Now, he was also known as Hopican. So Hopican would have been one of those life passages. So his nickname among the Lenape was Hopican, and Hopican translates to tobacco pipe. Tobacco pipe. So perhaps a peace pipe or a marijuana bowl. And, you know, just for having one of these guys named after this, right? Just for having one of these, I was arrested and detained by the KSP for owning one. Meanwhile, the very heart of Hopican's identity, Captain Pipe, is about a peace pipe. Okay, so Chief Pipe, Captain Pipe, he's an 18th century warrior chief of the Algonquin-speaking Lenape, and a member of the Wolf Clan. Hopican was born into the Wolf Clan of his mother, for the Lenape have a matrilineal kinship system of descent and inheritance. In this system, his mother's eldest brother was more important in their children's lives in the clan than their biological father from another clan. The uncle served especially as a male mentor to boys, bringing them into tribal male society. Little is known of Hopican's early years. He was probably born near the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania. His maternal uncle was Chief Custeloga. So Chief Custeloga would have been an important man in his life than his own father. And he would succeed Chief Custeloga as hereditary chief, according to the matrilineal kinship rules. He also, Turtle Heart would have been his uncle or maybe his father, Captain Pipe's uncle or father. Captain Pipe likely spent his early years either at Custeloga's town along French Creek in Mercer County. He may have also lived at his uncle's other main village, Cussawago, at the present site of Meadville in Crawford County. Crawford County, named after William Crawford, who Captain Pike was not a fan of. In 1730 A.D., White Eyes is born. White Eyes is also a Lenape warrior chief. Delaware, the Lenape people of the Turtle Clan. So White Eyes was a warrior chief of the Turtle Clan. Hopican, Captain Pipe, was a Lenape chief of the Wolf Clan. So the Lenape people have wolf clans, turtle clans, maybe other clans. Shawnee had 5 different clans, main clans too. White Eyes is a major Native American figure in the times of the American Revolutionary War. In 1731, 1732, George Washington was born, depending on the calendar. The calendar was changed. So either 1731 or 1732, George Washington was born. Also, Crawford. So William Crawford was born too. They were peers, roughly the same age, or less than 1 year's difference. 9 years after William Crawford was born in Virginia in 1732, Simon Girty is born in 1741. So Simon Girty would be younger than George Washington and William Crawford and White Eyes and Captain Pipe. 2 years prior to Simon Girty being born, his older brother Thomas Girty was born in 1739. Thomas, however, was different than James and George and Simon Girty because he was rescued at Kittanning. So they were all abducted, but Thomas was rescued at Kittanning, and so therefore he didn't go Indian. He didn't live with the Native American people. Meanwhile, Simon Girty lived with the Seneca, and then James Girty, his mother, and the baby John Turner all went with the Shawnee. So James Girty went with the Shawnee, George Girty went with the Lenape, and Simon Girty went with the Seneca people. Thomas got to go home. So, November 14th, 1741, Simon Girty is born. Simon Girty is born to his father and mother, Simon Girty the Elder, the Irishman, who was born in Ireland, and Mary Newton, an English woman, born near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Simon Girty the Elder arrived in North America in 1730 from Ireland, so he had been an 11-year immigrant. The accepted spelling of Girty's name, most likely a colonial deviation of McGearty, Garrity, or Gertie, with two E's, Girtee. Simon Girty was the second eldest child of the Girty Brady bunch, Thomas being born 2 years prior to him. The Girty family home was at Chambers Mill on the east side of the Susquehanna River above Harris's, above the site of the present city of Harrisburg, then in the city of Lancaster, in that portion which has since been formed into Dauphin County. Dauphin, D-A-U-P-H-I-N, Dauphin County. The place was familiarly known at that period as Chambers and Paxtang. 1743 A.D., James Girty is born. 1744 A.D., the beginning of the Third Intercolonial French and Indian War. King George's War, 1744 to 1748. Is the dates of King George's War, so 4 years. King George's War is the name given to the military operations in North America that formed part of the War of the Austrian Succession, which is 1740 to 1748. The War of Austrian Succession. So Queen Anne's War was about the Austrian Succession. No, the Spanish succession. So the Spanish didn't figure out who was going to be the heir to the throne of their kingdom in the early 1700s, and so therefore Europe descends into the chaos of war of everybody versus everybody, and then the War of Austrian Succession was the war that bled over to North America, which resulted in King George's War. The War of Austrian Succession. So again, we're going to have a problem with finding an heir to the throne. Now, this one is going to be a sexist perspective, okay? Because the emperor had actually set this thing up to where his daughter, his eldest daughter, would take over the throne. But as soon as he died, all the countries were in favor. But as soon as he died, then Prussia invaded Maria Theresa's succession in Silesia. So, the War of Austrian Succession, 1740 to 1748, involved most of the powers of Europe over the question of Maria Theresa's succession to the realms of the House of Habsburg. The war included King George's War in North America, the War of Jenkins' Ear, which formally began October 23rd, 1739, the First Carnatic War in India, and the First and Second Silesian Wars. Maria Theresa Walburga Amalia Christina was the only female ruler of the Habsburg dominions and the last of the House of Habsburg. Maria Theresa was the sovereign of Austria, Hungary, Croatia, Bohemia, Transylvania, Mantua, Milan, Lodomeria, and Galicia, the Austrian Netherlands, and Parma. By marriage, you have Maria Theresa was the Duchess of Lorraine, Grand Duchess of Tuscany, and Holy Roman Empress. Upon the death of Maria Theresa's father, Saxony, Prussia, Bavaria, and France all repudiated the Pragmatic Sanction of 1713 that they had recognized during Emperor Charles VI's lifetime. So Emperor Charles VI knew that it was going to be an issue that the heir to the throne was a woman, so he set up a Pragmatic Sanction way before he had died so that this wouldn't happen. And the pragmatic sanction was that his eldest daughter would become the queen, would be the monarch. But there was, people were used to the king being in charge, not the queen. So Prussia proceeded to invade the affluent Habsburg province of Silesia, sparking a 9-year conflict known as the War of the Austrian Succession. Prussia proceeded to invade the affluent Habsburg province of Silesia, sparking a 9-year conflict known as the War of the Austrian Succession, and subsequently conquered it. So she had lost that battle. Maria Theresa would later unsuccessfully try to reconquer Silesia during the 7 Years' War. So King George's War is the one we're focused on because that's the one that was happening here. It was the third of the 4 French and Indian Wars. It took place primarily in the British provinces of New York, Massachusetts Bay, New Hampshire, and Nova Scotia. Significant action in King George's War in 1744 to 1748 was an expedition organized by Massachusetts Governor William Shirley that besieged and ultimately captured the French fortress of Louisburg on Cape Lawburg, if you're from Louisville, Lawburg, the French fortress of Louisburg, on Cape Breton Island in Nova Scotia in 1745. In French, King George's War is known as the Third Intercolonial War. George II is who the namesake of the King George's War comes from. So let's find out about these King Georges. The Georgian era is King 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I think King William. And then there's King George the Sixth, who was given the King's Speech during Adolf Hitler's time. And I don't know if there's bloodlines, but by him taking on, he took on his father's name. So I'm not sure if George V and VI come from the bloodlines of George 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is George II, okay? So George II, George Augustus, it's a German name. George II. George II, who was born in 1863, dies 1760. He was the King of Great Britain and Ireland, Duke of Brunswick, Lunenburg, Hanover, and Prince Elector of the Holy Roman Empire from June 11th, 1727 until his death. George II was the last British monarch born outside of Great Britain. He wasn't even born in Great Britain, okay? So all this, talk about being born in America with Ted Cruz and the birther movement, you have George II. I don't even think George I was. He couldn't even speak English. George I couldn't even speak English, and George II wasn't even born in Great Britain. He was born and brought up in northern Germany. And Anglo-Saxons were originally from Germany. The Angles and the Saxons were Germanic-speaking tribes. France come from the German-speaking tribes too, the Franks. The Franks become France. So are all white people from Germany? It's starting to feel like that. 1745, George Gertie. This would have happened during in the middle of King George's War. George Gertie, the 4th child of the English woman Mary Newton and the Irishman Simon Gertie the Elder, was born in 1745 A.D. In the middle of King George's War, George joins James, Simon, and Thomas, his older brothers. The Gertie family didn't have any daughters. So, just in the middle of King George's War, this had happened. So, George II, right? George II, not the first, not the third, not the fourth. King George III, I would say most Americans are familiar with because of the American Revolution. So, this would have been the George before King George III. George I, he's a German too. George Ludwig, born 1660, dies 1727. George I was the King of Great Britain and Ireland from August 1st, 1714 until his death, and ruler of the Duchy and Electorate of Brunswick, Lunenburg, Hanover, in the Holy Roman Empire from 1698. George had married his cousin, Sophia Dorothea of Celly in 1682. He was 22, she was 16. This is, okay, there's 2 points. First, she's 16. So Mary of Maryland, she did something very similar. Mary of Maryland married when she was 15 years old. And I feel like I want to say that it was to a George, but I'm not 100% on that. But she was 15. So, like, is this accepted back then? Like, what the fuck is going on here? And he's 22, she's 16, so there's an age difference there. She's very young. She's also his cousin, his first cousin. So this wasn't the first time that these so-called royal families are marrying their cousins. William and Mary. William and Mary were first cousins. And now George and Sophia Dorothea were also cousins too. They were not a happy couple. They weren't happy to begin with. She referred to him as a pig snout. Oh, look at him. He's got a pig snout face. And she begged not to be forced to go through with the marriage. She fainted when she first was introduced to George the First. The union with her first cousin was an arranged marriage of state, instigated by the machinations of her mother, Sophia of Hanover, of his mother. So George's mother is the one that got Sophia Dorothea of Celli in 1682 for them to be married, for George and his cousin Sophia Dorothea to be married in 1682 when he was 22 and she was 16. So she is best remembered for her alleged affair with Swedish Count Philip Christoph von Königsmark that led to him being killed and her being imprisoned in the castle of Alden for the last 30 years of her life. Now, what had helped convince George, for some reason, neither one of these families really wanted to do it, but what helped convince George Ludwig, aka George I, to marry his first cousin, Sophia Dorothea. Sophia Dorothea came with a dowry of 100,000 thalers. Thalers were a German silver coin. So 100,000 thalers a year. Every year, 100,000 silver coins would go to George Ludwig if he would marry Sophia Dorothea. King George I, his marriage to Sophia Dorothea was doomed from the start. I mean, marriage to his first cousin, and he's being paid 100,000 thalers. George I treated his new bride with contempt. He humiliated her regularly in public, and they were constantly arguing. George I and Sophia Dorothea eventually did have a son and a daughter by Sophia. So Sophia did her job, right? She produced an heir to the throne. A male heir, which is more, there was no problem. There was no war of English secession. There was a Spanish secession and Austrian secession, but nothing by the English, because Sophia Dorothea, as much as King George hated her, gave her a son and a daughter, who both actually did really well. George Augustus, born 1683, went on to become King George II of Great Britain, who we're talking about right now with King George's War. So, you know, if it wasn't for Sophia Dorothea, we wouldn't have had King George's War. And that's, he's the King George, so the son becomes King George II, carries on the throne. But even the daughter, who was named after the mother, Sophia Dorothea, who was born 3 years later, 1686, later became wife of King Frederick William I of Prussia. Sophia Dorothea, born 1686, later to become wife of the King Frederick William I of Prussia, who was a very important, powerful political figure, and mother of Frederick the Great. So these are two royal families. This is the royal family of Prussia, which is Germany, the military arm of Germany before Germany was formed, and Britain. So Sophia Dorothea did not get treated well, okay, at all. In December 1694, the marriage was dissolved. Her children were then aged 11 and 8. They were taken away from her, and she was banished to the castle of Alden, never to see her offspring ever again. She remained incarcerated at Alden, A-H-L-D-E-N, for 33 years until her death in 1726. So it was actually a weird legal thing. They got the marriage annulled but they said that she had tried to flee because she was with that Swedish count. So they charged her with the crime of desertion, not the crime of anything else. So desertion, she's the one that reneged on the contract. Still keep on giving me this 100,000 silver thayers, even though she's in jail. When she lay dying with kidney failure, she sent a letter to George I in which she predicted that he, too, would be dead within the year. Sophia Dorothea, she had kidney failure. She was dying in the castle of Alden, that she was banished for 33 years because she was cheating on the king, but he was cheating too, and he was a dick. He was a total dick, so why would she not cheat? But she was able to curse him from the grave. She wrote a letter, said that he would be dead within the year after she was dying of kidney failure. The letter gets handed to him after she had already died, and then within a week of opening the letter, George I also died. So, George I, this is the first of, right, King George III is going to be the one that Americans are going to fight against. George I was unpopular in Great Britain for one major reason. He couldn't even speak English. He was the king of England, Great Britain, England, and Scotland, but he couldn't even speak English. He could not even speak English, at least not at first. George I was fluent in German, French, good Latin, some Italian, and Dutch. Eventually he would learn English, but he didn't know English. It wasn't his first native tongue. He's speaking German and French, Latin, right, Italian, Dutch. The British perceived George first as too German, and even wrongly assumed that he had a succession of German mistresses. I'm sure he had a succession of mistresses, whether they were German or not. However, in mainland Europe, George I was seen as a progressive ruler, supportive of the Enlightenment, who permitted his critics to publish without risk of severe censorship, and provided sanctuary to Voltaire when the philosopher was exiled from Paris in 1726. That's actually huge. Voltaire was a virulent critic of power and authority, and some people even, the age of Voltaire, they'll define an entire era based on him. So King George provided sanctuary to Voltaire. The Protestant George I was seen by most of his subjects as a better alternative to the Roman Catholic pretender James. William Makepeace Thackeray indicates such ambivalent feelings as he wrote, his heart was in Hanover. So this is George I. His heart wasn't in Britain, his heart was in Hanover. He was more than 50 years of age when he came amongst us. We took him because we wanted him, because he served our turn. We laughed at his uncouth German ways and sneered at him. He took our loyalty for what it was worth, laid hands on what money he could, kept us assuredly from popery. I, for one, would have been on his side in those days. Cynical and selfish as he was better than a king out of Saint Germain's, James the Stuart pretender, with the French king's orders in his pocket and a swarm of Jesuits in his train. So they're saying even though he was from Germany, at least he wasn't French. He wasn't listening to what the French king wanted. And he didn't have a whole bunch of Jesuits that was going to come in, behind him. All oppressors, it makes no sense, hereditary succession. Just because they were born in some family that long ago conquered the shit out of the territory, everybody had to do what the hell they said. Crooked George, crooked everybody. Crooked George, crooked William Mary, crooked George III. So, just quickly about George III, he was the King of Great Britain and Ireland from 1760 until the union of the two countries on January 1st, 1801. After which he was the King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland until his death. So, Great Britain formed in 1707, the United Kingdom formed in 1801. Now I come up to King George III. Now, this is the one that most Americans should be familiar with because of the American Revolution. King George III, who is also King George II's grandson, George William Frederick. He was the King of Great Britain and Ireland from 1760 until the union of the two countries on January 1st, 1801, after which he was the king of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland until his death. Now, Great Britain became great when Scotland and England became one in 1707, and then the United Kingdom was formed in 1801. You know, with Ireland included, and now it's Northern Ireland, right? That's the United Kingdom. So George III was concurrently Duke and Prince Elector of Brunswick, Lunenburg, Hanover in the Holy Roman Empire until his promotion to King of Hanover on October 12th, 1814. George III was the third British monarch of the House of Hanover, but unlike his two predecessors, he was actually born in Britain. Remember, King George I didn't even speak a lick of English. He didn't even know English. And that's what his country people thought, that maybe he loved Germany more than he loved England. But they were happy to have him because there was no popery and no Jesuits, and the French didn't control the English. And so that's why they accepted George I. Now, he spoke English as his first language. George III did. He was born in Britain, and he never visited Hanover. So he actually was the exact opposite of his predecessors in that regard. King George III's reign is noted for losing the First British Empire with a defeat in the American Revolution, the building of a second empire based in India, Asia, and Africa, the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution that made Britain an economic powerhouse, and above all, the life and death struggle with the French, 1793 to 1815, which ended with the defeat of Napoleon in 1815. So, a lot of people say that he was the scapegoat for the failure of imperialism. Once the American Revolution happened and the British Empire ceased to exist, and they had to rebuild a second empire based in India, Asia, and Africa. So, that's King George. But we're not on King George yet. The third, we're on King George II, and that was because of his war, King George's War from 1744 to 1748. On August 10th, 1748, in the last year of King George's War, Simon Girty the Elder had received the proper authority to traffic with the Native Americans. So to trade goods, he had got the proper British authority to go ahead and do so. The Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, it looks Aix-la-Chapelle, Aix-la-Chapelle in present-day Germany, ended King George's War in 1748 and restored Louisbourg to France, but failed to resolve any outstanding territorial issues. So this makes me think of a correction. There is a Treaty of Ryswick, which ended Queen Anne's War, and now you get the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, which was in Germany. Ryswick was sort of close to there. It was in the Dutch Republic, Ryswick. It was signed September 20th. Oh no, this is King William's War. The end of King William's War, the first French and Indian War, ended with the Treaty of Ryswick, and it was signed 1697, September 20th, in the Dutch Republic. The treaty settled the War of the League of Augsburgs, also known as the 9 Years' War, which pitted France against the General Grand Alliance of England, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and the United Provinces. Another correction, the Allegheny, it's the Allegheny River, Allegheny River is how you're supposed to pronounce it. In 1749, Simon Girty Sr. and his family from Chambers, they resettled. So in 749, they went from Chambers Mill and then settled on Sherman's Creek in what is now Perry County in 1749. This would be the same year that Father Le Loutre's War begins. Father Le Loutre's War, 1749 to 1755, aka the Indian War, the Micmac War, and the Anglo-Micmac War. Father Le Loutre's War's namesake is for Father Le Loutre, a French Catholic priest who became the commander-in-chief in King George's War and in Father Le Loutre's War. He'll eventually die in this conflict. So during the time period of Father Le Loutre's War, you have a lot of things that happened. May 1750, after establishing a trading post, Simon Girty the Elder and Mary Newton had their 4 boys with them: Thomas, Simon, James, and George. So they're on Sherman's Creek now. They've established a trading post. In May of 1750, the sheriff is going to arrest the entire Girty family. Mother, father, children, along with other squatters, for building a home on Sherman's Creek on the Susquehanna River before the British authorities allowed any settlers to build there. The British authorities, specifically George Croghan, which I've mentioned before, George Croghan was George Washington's rival, and he was a Western land agent for about 30-something years. And eventually he's going to be accused of treason, and he's going to lose all of his land ownings. All of his land holdings. So the British authorities, specifically George Croghan, also burned down the Girty home, shed, barn, and corral. All squatters were forced to post bonds of £500 each and were bound for trial at Cumberland County, Pennsylvania court. So this was May 22nd when this happened, 1750. Specifically, 8 provincials, good and true men, this is the government saying, appointed by the government, accompanied by an undersheriff of the county, Cumberland, proceeded by force of arms to carry out the wishes of the Native Americans. The first settlement reached contained 5 log cabins. The occupants were taken into custody and the houses burned. Each settler was bound in a recognizance of £100 to appear and answer for his trespass on the first day of the next county court, which was to be held at Shippensburg.